Welcome to DLA Dialogues from Factory to Foxhole, the podcast where we dive into the heart of DLA's mission and mindset. I'm your host, Jake Boyer. Today's episode is all about unmanned aerial systems, what they are, why they matter more than ever in modern warfare, and what DLA's role is in supporting that mission in a more contested logistics environment. We're joined by Major Andrew Umstead from DLA Weapons Support. Don't let the Golden Gate Bridge fool you, to help us break that down. Drew, welcome to DLA Dialogues.
Thanks for having me.
Before we get into the topic, give us a little bit of your background and how you came to DLA Weapons Support.
Sure. So I'm an Army contracting officer. I've been in contracting for the last 4 years. Prior to that, I was a logistics officer. I came to DLA specifically because I was seeking an opportunity to really explore the touch point between the Defense Industrial Base and the Department of War. This offered an opportunity to do that, which is what I currently do in my day-to-day now. The other part of that is I've lived geographically separated from my wife for the last 4 years. She's based out of Richmond, and so this was an opportunity to come home. So that's why I'm here.
Well, it's great that you get to be with family and do some interesting work here with DLA. I'm glad that's working out.
Thank you.
Let's start simple. A lot of people hear the term drone and think they know what that means. But when we say unmanned aircraft systems, or UAS, what are we really talking about?
So at its core, that question seems like it would have a very straightforward answer. The self-evident answer is it's an aircraft system that doesn't have a crew on board. But in terms of the Department of War, that's a really complicated answer. And as with so many things that are simple, there's complexity underlying it. The technology with UAS is advancing at a rapid pace. Its application is also advancing rapidly, specifically as we see things out of Ukraine, out of the Strait of Hormuz, and really in the Black Sea and in the Mediterranean. So there's a lot of changing applications and technologies emerging as UAS becomes more and more prevalent on the battlefield.
You were part of a team that wrote a campaign of learning white paper touching on UAS. In the paper, you specifically call out that these systems are low cost, adaptable, and expendable. Why does that matter so much from a military logistics perspective?
Well, it's paramount from both a military and logistics perspective because often those things are fundamental to maintaining an edge over your adversary, and especially the case in a protracted war or a protracted conflict. So, where you can rapidly adapt and produce at scale in order to overwhelm your adversary, we commonly see that we're able to overcome any sort of conflict by means of mass production and application.
Let's bring this back to DLA. For our viewers who can't see the connection, where does DLA fit into that broader UAS ecosystem today?
Sure. So in order to answer that question, it's necessary to frame it properly. So within the US, there's a whole of government approach currently being applied to UAS. Across the federal government, there are 15 concurrent efforts that all are relative to UAS. DLA is a small portion of that. Now, specific to DLA, we are currently involved in procurement of Group 1 and 2 drones through the construction and equipment support technology, but we're also providing support in terms of contracted logistics support. So buying parts and selling them when needed.
As you know, this podcast is all about contested logistics. So let's define that clearly in the context of this conversation. What's different about the environment we're preparing for that makes UAS especially relevant?
One thing I've seen consistently in circles when we talk about UAS and the advent of AI is that the character of war has changed. I don't really hold that it's fundamentally changed. It stays the same. But what's different is the way in which war manifests and endures. So I've mentioned before their use in Ukraine and in sea lanes of communication, as well as in the Strait of Hormuz, which technically is a sea lane of communication, right? But they all serve as sobering examples of what they could potentially be used for in the future. But the human mind is endlessly creative, and we are only really seeing the tip of the iceberg here. They've got a huge variety of applications that we probably haven't even conceived of just yet.
One of the ideas in your paper is that the traditional demand-based reactive model may not be enough for the speed and scale of this problem. In plain English, what does that mean?
Well, in layman's terms, what we do in peace or in limited scope conflict is simply not going to work when you apply it at scale with a peer. So our just-in-time logistics models, both from a logistics perspective, but also from a commercial perspective, they won't assuage, we can no longer rely on the things that assuage our notion of retail therapy. We have to get after changing that. It's highly likely that the lines of communication given a peer-to-peer fight will not remain open, and they will be very challenging to maintain flow through.
What does this conversation tell us about where logistics is headed more broadly, especially as the joint force becomes more distributed, digital, and contested?
The short answer to that is I don't know. I think there's a lot of examples we can look at as we look at the Department of War writ large and out in the international community. The sustainment community, for example, is talking about it at length all the time. But I would caution the wise to consider how we look at those things over time. I liken it to using Ukraine or what's happening in the Strait of Hormuz as comparing the Crimean War and the Russo-Japanese War to predict what the First World War would look like. The takeaway here is it's going to change. There are things that may be true now that will remain true, but there's false lessons that we'll probably learn and have to adapt against as we see a peer-to-peer fight manifest.
I think it's interesting that you draw that echo of drones to what happened in World War I, especially when you look at what's happening in Ukraine with kind of static fronts and just meat grinder tactics. It's almost like drones have made everything old new again. So that's a really great insight. All right, Drew, it's time for the rapid fire round. First, what's one thing you've read, listened to, or watched recently that you would recommend to our audience?
Sure. So I'm going to use two examples here from different media sources. So YouTube, I'm currently using something called the Grail method, and it's a video I recently watched that's essentially a note-taking system. It integrates creative thinking, ideas, note-taking, and it combines them into something of a sketchbook and note-taking system. So kind of is an example of getting after what I'm recommending is introducing creativity at a heightened speed and have something to capture that, to remember it by. The other thing, I've been reading a couple of different novels. The last one was Master and Commander by Patrick O'Brien. Great book, great movie. So absolutely loved the read. Can't wait to get into the rest of the series.
Awesome. Second, what's your superpower?
If I had to pick, I would say imagination. So creativity has been something that's been at the forefront of my mind and what I've endeavored to fulfill my life with. So creativity in the form of imagination. My mind's constantly moving and creating things, and I'm trying to capture them down all the time.
Finally, what's your kryptonite?
So in the same vein, thought. So my imagination's constantly working, right? But there's details that need to be implemented into those creative thoughts. There's critical thinking that goes on, and oftentimes that thought can slow down action. So deciding that point in time where creative thinking or critical thinking need to translate into action is something that I routinely struggle with. So in the same way that imagination is something that I would claim to be a superpower, it also somewhat serves as a kryptonite at the same time.
I guess every rose has its thorn, right?
Indeed.
Well, Major Umstead, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
I think the big takeaway here is that UAS is not just about a new technology. It's about how the character of conflict is changing and how sustainment has to evolve with it. For DLA Dialogues, I'm Jake Boyer. Until next time, remember that learning is a superpower. Use it wisely.